So here we're looking at a cell, a very simplified version, and basically inside the cell there are different components, and therefore it needs a cell wall to hold all of those components. That cell wall allows things to go in and out of the cell. Now if we zoom into that cell membrane, we can see here there's two layers, and these little figures are actually phospholipids. And because there's two layers of them, we call this the phospholipid bilayer. Now, looking at just one of those phospholipids, this is what we see. It's got a phosphate group head, and it has two fatty acid chains. Here's one, and here's another. So fatty acids are in all of our cells, and this is why we're so interested in them. We're going to be looking at this structure down here, which is a more detailed version of one of these quickly lines. So let's see what we're looking at here. We have a carbon backbone. See, these are carbons. These carbons have hydrogens bonded to them. So this backbone is known as the fat group, and this side over here is known as the carboxylic acid group. What this means is that we have a fat group and an acid group, and that makes it a fatty acid. You can see here that each carbon has 4 little sticks, and those sticks represent bonds. And it can bond with 4 other things because it has 4 electrons to share. Now what happens is sometimes we can get stronger bonds, and these are called double bonds. So I've drawn a little double bond represented by this kind of equal sign here. You can see here still carbon has 1, 2, 3, 4 little lines going out. It's still sharing 4 electrons. But these carbons are now sharing an even stronger bond, which means that there is no more space to attach hydrogens here and here. So what happens is these ones on the top, they actually, like magnets, they repel each other. And this repelling force causes the structure to then bend, and it has this curvy kind of shape. Which is why when we looked at the leg here, you can see that it's kind of bent here in this illustration, and then the one on the left is a bit more straight. So these actually are what we call saturated and unsaturated fatty acids. The saturation word comes from it's saturated with hydrogens. So you can see here that this one here has the maximum amount of hydrogens it can have, and so it's saturated. If we look at the one below, it is missing 2 hydrogens, and therefore it's unsaturated. So when we add double bonds, the structure becomes more and more unsaturated. Now imagine we put a whole ton of these saturated fatty acids into a jar. They would pack together really nicely because they're all kind of straight. And so what this means is that it's more dense. And that means that it's actually harder to break that structure. And so what you would be familiar with is things like butter, which is solid at room temperature. So saturated fats tend to be solid at room temperature. If you put these unsaturated fatty acids into a jar, they wouldn't pack together so neatly because of these bends, and that leads them to being liquid at room temperature. Now this liquid nature is really important in our cell membranes to allow things in and out of the cell. If it was packed too closely together and too tight, then it wouldn't allow anything in or out of the cell, and it wouldn't be able to function. Now just a little point for interest. What happens if one of these hydrogen atoms moved to the bottom? It would become balanced on either side, and the molecule would straighten out. This configuration of the hydrogens is called transconfiguration, and this is how they make margarine. They make it so that it becomes solid at room temperature and spreadable. But this is really bad because it's not something that's natural in the body. It's essentially a mutated fatty acid. So the naming of the fatty acids comes from where the first double bond occurs. And this is the head and this is the tail. And so if we're counting from the end, the Greek word for end is omega. So we count the number of carbons and see where the first double bond occurs. So we have carbon 1, carbon 2, carbon 3. And after the third carbon, this is where we see the first double bond. So this fatty acid here is called an omega-3 fatty acid. Now there's a whole family of omega-3 fatty acids, and they just differ depending on how many double bonds they have and how many carbons they have, so they can be longer or shorter chains. So let's count the number of carbons in this one. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 carbons. And how many double bonds do we have? 1, 2, 3. So we write it like with a little colon, 3. That's the degree of saturation. And the Greek symbol for omega looks like this little horseshoe. And we mentioned that it's an omega-3 fatty acid. And this is actually called alpha-linolenic acid, which is the parent of the omega-3 family. It is the only essential omega-3 fatty acid. And what makes it essential is that the body can't make this, but the things that it becomes, the body can make. So when this gets more carbons, it turns into other things. When it gets more double bonds, it turns into other things. And that's what the body can do. But the body cannot make ALA, which is why we need to take it from our food. And it's essential because the body cannot insert double bonds before the 7th carbon. So it can't insert a double bond here, 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 or here. And just if you're wondering why you never really hear about omega-2 or omega-5, it's because in nature, double bonds tend to occur 3 carbons apart. So 3, 6, 9, and so on. Let's take a look at another one. How many carbons are in this? It says 18 carbons. And how many double bonds are there? 2. And where does the first double bond occur after? 6. So this is an omega-6 fatty acid. And this one has the name of linoleic acid, which is the first of the omega-6 family and also known as the parent. So like the omega-3 one that we just looked at, this one the body can't make. But when the body can add with enzymes, it can add more double bonds and it can add more carbons to turn it into different things, which we're going to have a look at.